This is my personal tier list of the best RPGs released in the last 5 years. Each game is ranked based on my own experience, looking at the story, gameplay, characters, and how memorable it felt from start to finish. This isn't about review scores or popularity, but how these RPGs actually landed for me. Let's dive in. Harvestella clicked with me in a way most farming sims never have, mainly because it treats itself as a story-driven RPG first and a farming game second. What kept me hooked wasn't planting crops, but spending time in a slow, fading world, helping regular people through well-written side quests, and never feeling pushed to rush the main story. I really liked being able to move at my own pace and simply live in the setting. The combat is easily the weakest part. It's simple and lacks impact, but it never became frustrating enough to ruin the game. As a cozy RPG with light farming elements and strong writing, Harvestella works very well for me, even if it plays things a bit safe, which is why I place it in the good tier. Unicorn Overlord surprised me by how fresh it felt, even though its story setup is very classic fantasy. What really pulled me in was how the world is built through its characters instead of long lore dumps, making every ally and side story feel meaningful. I loved how the strategy combat works, letting me plan squads, experiment with positioning, and feel smart when a setup finally clicked. The battles stayed interesting thanks to varied maps and clever objectives, and I never felt like I was just repeating the same fight. Combined with its beautiful art style and strong character writing, Unicorn Overlord kept me engaged from start to finish, and that mix of tactical depth and personal storytelling is why it easily earns an excellent spot for me. Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake sits at the bottom of my list, even though I fully understand why many people admire it. The HD 2D visuals are gorgeous, and the presentation does a great job honoring the original, but once that surface-level charm wears off, I was left with a very rigid, old-school RPG that constantly tested my patience. The story barely gives you anything to latch onto, the party members feel like empty shells, and the moment-to-moment play is packed with menu friction, random encounters, and dated design choices. I respect its legacy and what it represents for the genre, but actually playing it felt more like an obligation than enjoyment, which is why this one firmly earns its place in my trash tier. Tales of Arise felt like the moment the series finally found a fresh direction again, especially for someone like me who's loved Tales in the past, but kept feeling disappointed over the years. What stood out most was how strong the characters and their relationships are, especially watching Alphen and Xion slowly change through shared struggle rather than forced drama. The story tackles heavy themes like oppression and war, but it balances that with warmth, humor, and genuine character growth. Combat was another big win for me, feeling faster, smoother, and more satisfying than older entries while still keeping that classic Tales identity. Add in the beautiful art style and smart quality of life changes, and this ended up being a really memorable RPG for me, one that comfortably earns its place in the great range of my list. Metaphor ReFantazio stands out as one of those rare RPGs that feels confident, thoughtful, and fully realized from start to finish. What impressed me most was how it tackles heavy political and social ideas without hiding behind subtlety, while still grounding everything in strong characters and meaningful relationships. The calendar system, bonds, and choices all feel purposeful, and nothing comes across as filler or wasted time. Combat is deep and flexible thanks to the archetype system, rewarding planning and experimentation in a way that stays engaging even dozens of hours in. Between its bold art direction, powerful themes, and refined Atlas design, this is the kind of game that stays with you long after the credits, and for me, it earns its masterpiece placement without hesitation. Star Ocean: The Divine Force marked a welcome return for me after how disappointing the previous entry was, and it reminded me why I liked this series in the first place. The revamped combat, especially the Duma system, adds speed and freedom to both battles and movement, making moment-to-moment play far more engaging than before. I enjoyed the party dynamics and the smaller character moments, even though tracking them down was unnecessarily tedious. On the downside, the game is dragged down by stiff character models, empty-looking environments, and a poorly designed interface that never stops being distracting. I had fun with it despite those flaws, but it never fully comes together, which is why it ends up sitting in my good tier rather than pushing higher. Trails into Reverie works as a massive payoff for everything I've invested in this series over the years, and it rewards that commitment in a really satisfying way. I loved how the game juggles three different routes, constantly switching perspectives to keep the pacing sharp and the events tightly connected. Even with a huge cast, the writing gives characters space to interact in ways I'd never seen before, and those crossover moments were genuinely rewarding. The turn-based combat remains one of the strongest in the genre, with smart use of positioning, turn order, and team attacks that kept every battle engaging. It's absolutely not friendly to newcomers, but for longtime fans like me, this stands as a clear highlight of the series and firmly earns its place in the excellent tier. Final Fantasy Tactics Remaster ends up being one of my biggest disappointments on this list, which hurts to say because I adore the original. While the core design, job system, and tactical depth are still strong, this remaster doesn't do enough to justify its place on modern hardware. Too many elements remain clunky, the pacing drags badly in places, and even with quality of life tweaks, the experience still demands a level of patience I just don't have anymore. I respect what this game meant historically, but playing it now felt more like revisiting a museum piece than enjoying a refined update. Because of that disconnect, this remaster lands firmly in my trash tier. Atelier Ryza 3 closes the trilogy in a way that surprised me with how big and engaging it became over time. I spent hours roaming its open zones, chasing landmarks, gathering materials, and getting lost in that satisfying loop of exploration, alchemy, and preparation. The larger scale gives the characters more room to shine, and I enjoyed spending extra time with a cast I'd grown attached to across all three games. Combat stays fun thanks to its rhythm of skills, items, and secret keys, even if the game expects you to stay well prepared at all times. Some awkward localization and tiny text held it back, but the ambition and payoff were hard to ignore, earning Atelier Ryza 3 a solid spot in my great tier. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 announces itself as something special right from the start, and it never loses that confidence along the way. I was constantly impressed by how tightly paced everything is, with no wasted hours and a strong sense of urgency driving every decision forward. The turn-based combat is outstanding, mixing precise timing, parries, and character-specific systems that kept every fight engaging and demanded my full attention. Each party member plays differently, encouraging smart setups and real mastery rather than simple number grinding. Combined with its striking art direction, powerful themes, and bold creative identity, this is the kind of RPG that defines a generation for me, and it stands proudly in my masterpiece tier. Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth takes everything I liked about the previous turn-based shift and pushes it much further in the right direction. I really enjoyed how combat adds movement, positioning, and environmental chaos, making every fight more active and expressive instead of static. Hawaii works brilliantly as a setting, packed with personality, side activities, and absurd encounters that constantly break up the pace in fun ways. Ichiban and Kiryu balance humor and weight extremely well, and the expanded job system kept battles varied without forcing tedious grinding. With its confident design, smarter combat flow, and ridiculous amount of worthwhile content, this one earns its place firmly in my excellent tier. Romancing Saga 2 Remake was my first real step into the SaGa series, and while I admired a lot of what it was trying to do, it never fully clicked for me. I liked the open-ended structure, the focus on generations, and the freedom to build parties however I wanted, experimenting with weapons, magic, and inherited abilities across centuries. Learning new skills through glimmers and triggering powerful united attacks gave combat a nice sense of unpredictability, and the quality of life updates made it far easier to approach than older entries. That said, the lack of strong character attachment, the heavy reliance on luck, and the constant generational resets made it hard for me to stay emotionally invested. I enjoyed my time with it in short bursts, but it never rose beyond being interesting and comfortable, which is why it lands in my mediocre tier. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 stands as the point where everything Monolith Soft had been building toward finally comes together. I spent an enormous amount of time in Aeonios, not because the game dragged, but because the systems, characters, and world constantly encouraged me to keep going. The six-person party works brilliantly, giving everyone room to grow naturally, while combat layers classes, roles, and chain attacks into something deep but rewarding to master. Exploration opens up in meaningful ways, side content adds weight to the world, and the emotional themes land with quiet confidence rather than spectacle. Even with some visual rough edges and pacing quirks early on, the ambition and execution here are undeniable, securing Xenoblade Chronicles 3 a permanent place in my masterpiece tier. Star Ocean, the second story R, takes a classic I always respected and makes it far easier to enjoy today without losing what made it special. I liked how the remake smooths out old frustrations with clear tutorials, generous fast travel, visible encounters, and better guidance for systems like item creation and private actions. Combat stays fast and flexible, party building remains deep, and breaking the game through smart crafting is still part of the fun. The new visual style works well, mixing detailed environments with classic character designs, even if balance is looser and challenge drops unless you push the difficulty. It doesn't reinvent the formula, but it refines it with care and confidence, earning Star Ocean, the second story R, a comfortable place in my great tier. Octopath Traveler 0 kept me busy for a very long time, but that time commitment didn't pay off in a way that worked for me. The combat system is still strong, the HD 2D visuals look great, and the music does a lot of heavy lifting across long battles and major moments. I appreciated how its different paths eventually connect, and how mechanics like town rebuilding tie into the larger themes, but getting there took far too much patience. The early and middle portions dragged badly, dialogue often lacked weight, and managing dozens of party members felt bloated rather than rewarding. By the time it finally delivers its strongest material, I was more exhausted than satisfied, and that imbalance defines my time with it. Despite its ambition and late payoff, this one ends up firmly placed in my trash tier. Triangle strategy moves at a slow, deliberate pace, and that approach defines the entire game. The story leans heavily on politics, resources, and difficult moral choices, giving weight to long conversations and council debates. The Scales of Conviction system works well, often pushing decisions in directions I didn't fully control, which made choices feel earned rather than cosmetic. Combat stays grounded and tactical, with strong map design and steady difficulty that rewards planning instead of flashy tricks. Even with a restrained cast and quiet presentation, everything comes together in a thoughtful and well-balanced way, placing triangle strategy firmly in my excellent tier. Fantasy Life, the Girl Who Steals Time, caught my attention as a relaxed RPG that mixes everyday activities with light action in a way that's easy to enjoy. I spent most of my time switching between different lives, gathering materials, crafting gear, and helping people around the town, and the loop stayed engaging without becoming stressful. Combat is simple and forgiving, which makes it a nice break from the usual intensity of RPG battles. And jumping between fighting monsters and doing cozy tasks kept things varied. Building up skills, unlocking new tools, and slowly expanding what I could do gave me plenty of small goals to chase without pressure. It doesn't aim to be deep or challenging all the time, but it stays pleasant and consistently enjoyable from start to finish. In my tier list, this one comfortably settles into the good tier. Nike's Monstrum Nox stood out to me as a fast and stylish action RPG that keeps momentum high from start to finish. I spent most of my time slicing through enemies, upgrading gear, and using monstrum abilities like wall running, gliding, and grappling to move through the city in creative ways. Combat is quick and flashy without becoming overwhelming, and switching between characters kept fights lively and flexible. Even though much of the adventure takes place in one city, the movement powers made getting around fun instead of repetitive, and side missions gave me good reasons to explore every corner. It may not push complexity too far, but it stays exciting, smooth, and consistently enjoyable, which earns it a strong place in my great tier. Dragon Quest I and II HD 2D Remake takes me back to the roots of the genre, for better and for worse. I liked how the HD 2D style gives these classics a fresh look while still keeping that old-school charm intact, especially during battles and dungeon crawling. Playing Dragon Quest I as a solo hero pushed me to think carefully every turn, while Dragon Quest II opened things up with a party that added more variety and personality. At the same time, the very simple systems and uneven difficulty reminded me just how old these games really are, even with modern quality of life tweaks helping smooth things out. I respected the experience more than I truly enjoyed it, and while it's a nice tribute to RPG history, it didn't fully hold my attention compared to newer entries. Because of that balance, this remake ends up sitting squarely in my mediocre tier. Chained Echoes struck me as a thoughtfully built RPG that understands classic design without copying it blindly. I liked how battles stayed engaging through smart systems like Overdrive, which pushed me to mix up actions instead of repeating the same moves. The global progression design meant I could focus on experimenting with characters and setups rather than grinding endlessly, and that freedom kept things fresh. Optional content added meaning without bloating the experience, and the overall presentation showed clear care and intention behind every system. It respects old-school ideas while shaping them into something confident and modern, and that balance places it comfortably among my excellent tier RPGs. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth expanded everything I loved about the remake and pushed it on a much larger scale. I enjoyed moving across wide regions, taking on optional activities, and seeing familiar locations reimagined with real care and detail. Combat stayed engaging thanks to deeper team mechanics, smart enemy design, and powerful partner abilities that rewarded planning instead of button mashing. Despite a few pacing issues and an overstuffed finale, this is one of those rare RPGs that stands above almost everything else. It lands in my masterpiece tier without hesitation. Visions of Mana brings the series back in a way that kept me engaged from start to finish, even with a few rough edges along the way. I liked how the game keeps things clear and approachable early on, then slowly opens up with a combat system that rewards smart class switching and good timing instead of pure button mashing. Mixing elemental vessels with character-specific classes gave me plenty of room to experiment, and boss fights pushed me to actually use those systems properly. The cast grew on me as their personal struggles became clearer, though pacing issues later on did slow things down more than I wanted. Even with those problems, the fast combat, strong class design, and vibrant world left a positive impression enough for this one to earn a solid place in my great tier. Octopath Traveler 2 brought me right back to what made the original special, even if it doesn't push the formula very far. I enjoyed traveling between paths, meeting 8 very different characters, and seeing how their individual arcs contrasted in scale and mood. The day and night system added some smart flexibility, especially in towns, while combat remained just as tactical as ever with its focus on weakness, discovery, and careful planning. It can be grind-heavy and overly familiar at times, and the lack of bold evolution is noticeable, but the battles are still rewarding and the character routes come together better than before. Even with its safe design choices, this sequel earns its spot comfortably within my excellent tier. Trails in the Sky First Chapter Remake impressed me with its careful world building, strong character writing, and a sense of long-term planning that's rare in RPGs. I liked how conversations, side quests, and even small NPC details made the setting feel alive, and the combat rewarded patience and smart positioning rather than rushing through fights. Systems like timeline control and orbments gave me plenty to think about, and progression always felt meaningful without heavy grinding. That said, the slow pace, dated structure, and heavy setup made it harder for me to stay fully engaged moment to moment, especially knowing this is only the opening chapter of a much larger saga. I respect what it's doing more than I enjoyed playing it, which is why this one ends up landing in my mediocre tier.